I'm Tess from Ruby Tuesday Art and welcome to today's tutorial. I'm really excited about this particular video because we're painting a couple of my favorite plants. We're going to be having a go at painting some wattle and some billy buttons, and I hope that I'm holding this in frame. These are a couple of really lovely plants. I see wattle obviously seasonally when I'm walking around. I love admiring it and seeing all the different, seeing how many different types of wattle I can spot. I don't know if that's weird and boring, but I really enjoy it and love it. And also billy buttons, I'm not sure if you can see, I actually have a few pops here. And I just love them and think that they're really beautiful and whimsical. So let's get started.
Okay, to get started, I'm going to mix up the colours that I need for the wattle. I'm using my size 12 brush for my colour mixing, just because it holds more paint and water, so it's quicker. I'm grabbing the yellow from my paint palette, which is a really bright yellow, and that's why I'm actually mixing it up, because I want it to be not so intense. So I'm grabbing the yellow from the paint palette and putting it in my mixing tray, and I'm going to add in a little bit of red to make it a warmer yellow, or almost an orange. I'm checking it out on my paper towel and it looks awesome. That's what I want. I want it bright, but not as bright as it would have been if I used it straight from the palette. Now I'm going to mix up my green that I need for the leaves and stem for the wattle. Again, the green that is in the palette is just too bright. So I want to just mix it up a little bit by adding some blue and making it a cooler green. So I put the green, a blob of green from the palette, into the mixing tray thing, sorry. And I add some blue, and I've added too much blue. So I now need to add more green, just to make sure it's the right shade of green. Okay, that's perfect. And if you're not sure about mixing colors, I've got a whole video about color theory, so I'll put a link to that. Make sure you go back and watch it, and that will really help you with working out what colors to mix to get certain other colors. So anyway, I've moved down to my size 4 brush, and I'm painting the stem for my wattle. I've painted a Y shape just using the very tip of the brush because I want it to be really thin. So I've got more little branches coming off that Y shape, and these are going to be the leaves. And then I'm getting that green that I've mixed up, and I'm just using it on the very tip of the brush to paint a heap of teeny tiny little lines really, really close together. And I don't want them to be too neat, so I'm working quite quickly. They're really close together. They're really teeny tiny, but they're not actually all touching. I want a tiny bit of white space between as many as I can, just so that you can see that they are there and it's not just a blob of green colour. But work quickly so that they're not completely perfect. You don't want it to be perfect, you want it to be messy. I know I say that all the time, but I'm not joking. The messier, the better. So yeah, I'm working really quickly, and I find that helps me stress less, I guess. I don't know. And it just gives a really good effect. But yeah, just don't spend ages trying to perfect each tiny little brush stroke, because it might end up looking more forced than you want it to, and you want it to be a bit more free and flowing if you can. So there are my leaves, and I'm rinsing off my brush and now grabbing some water from the warm water jar and picking up my yellow. I'm going to do a series of little yellow circles, none of them touching, because I'm going to be using my layering effect, which means I put down the first layer, let it completely dry, and then add a second layer on top overlapping. And you'll be able to see, once I've done it, it's a really beautiful effect that's quite unique to watercolour. So I'm doing a series of these dots, as I said, none of them touching, and I'm working quite quickly, not trying to make it too perfect or anything like that. Now I'm going to move on to my billy button. So I'm doing a bigger circle with that same yellow, and I'm dabbing a little bit more colour down the bottom of it just to give it a bit more shadow and depth. And then I'm rinsing my brush, and I'm going to mix up a colour for the stem I've already actually got a little bit of brown ready to go, but I'm going to put in a touch of that blue-green just to make it a bit more kind of grey. And I'm going to do a really thin curved stem with just the tip of the brush, and I'm not letting it touch the actual top of the belly button because the stem mix will bleed into that yellow ball. I've done a second stem because I wanted to add a second belly button. So I'm just repeating the same process with that yellow ball. And now I'm going to dab in a little bit more colour down the bottom, again to add shadow and depth. And so next I need everything to dry, and I'm going to use the power of video editing to make that happen. I can't stress to you enough how important it is for the paint to be completely dry before you start putting on the next layer if you are going to use the layering effect. Otherwise it's just going to be a big mess. So I'm moving down to a size 0 brush, also available in my kits. All of these brushes and paints and paper are available in my kit. So yeah, I've grabbed some of that green paint that I mixed earlier on the very tip of this size 0 brush. And it's quite concentrated because it's dried a little bit. And I'm just adding in a little bit of depth and shadow by putting in some more brush strokes on these leaves, and also adding some shadow to the actual stem of the wattle too. So I'm not repainting the whole thing, I'm just putting in a few little brush strokes that are made with this dark green colour, just to add a bit more variety. Alright, so I'm moving up to my size 4 brush again, and I'm picking up some more of this yellow, and I'm repeating the exact same process as before for the flowers of the wattle, spreading the dots apart, and I'm actually letting them overlap with the dots that I painted earlier, and that will give you that really lovely layered effect. You'll notice that I've added a few wattle flowers like a little bit out from the rest. Okay, now for the belly button, I'm going to add in some dots of the darker, more concentrated yellow that I mixed earlier. Just on the very tip of the brush, adding a heap of dots randomly spread across the flower, making sure that they're darker in that shadowed section down the bottom. And as the paint on my brush gets more diluted, or there's less paint on the brush, I'm working my way up away from the shadow. So when you've got your paint freshly put on your brush, that's when it's going to be darkest. So that's when you would start where the shadows are. And as you're working, you work your way away from the shadow. And that works really well with the paint on your brush sort of drying or becoming more diluted and lighter. So as I was talking, I grabbed some of that stem mix and I've just added a shadow along the edge of these of the stem to add some more depth and variety again. And I'm going back up to my wattle just to add in a couple more bits and pieces just to fill in some gaps that I thought looked a bit sparse. And you'll see that there are a few yellow dots that aren't actually connected to anything at all. And that is totally fine because we are doing a loose watercolor painting rather than a realistic flower. So we're giving the impression of wattle rather than painting something that's very realistic. And I'm adding in another leaf to this wattle because I felt like it looked a bit gappy and just not quite finished. And I am letting this leaf touch a few of the yellow dots from earlier that are already dry. If I let the green paint touch any that are wet, then that paint will bleed and make a bit of a mess. And there you go. We have just painted a wattle flower and some billy buttons.